Hi, this is Steve Addison for the Movements Podcast. The podcast for people who want to multiply disciples and churches everywhere. Today I'm talking to Jeff and Angie Sundell about the early days of pioneering movements in South Asia.
When we sort of wrestled through God was calling us out of business, and of course we didn't really know what to do, so we went to seminary. And so when we had Dr. Idle was one of the professors there, and he was telling us these stories from all around the world, but in particular places like Cambodia and China and India, of these stories of these spontaneous church planting movements. And then he's also having us dig into people like Roland Allen and along that line, and master plan of evangelism, master plan of discipleship. So you're not only reading some of this, but you're hearing stories through the grapevine. And then Dr. Idle was an incredible, actually, storyteller of just telling what God was doing. So you'd literally be sitting in a class getting excited about something you really had no idea what it was. And it took several years for us to sort of really figure out that God was calling us overseas. We really planned to go to the Stans, and we didn't have our hours done, and so God ended up jettisoning us into South Asia. And right before we left, we actually met David Watson, and so we got to sit down with him and hear some stories. And the place we were going to actually move to, he was telling stories of the political upheavals and all this stuff. And I remember one of our professors saying, "Oh, he's just it's sensational. It's not like that." Now, I will say, though, once we lived there, it actually was exactly what David described. So it was more so radical as far as the wild political things. But so I think that was sort of the first inklings of just really excited about it, but no idea what it really looked like. And then,
so what was going on for you at that time, Angie?
Well, God had to bring me to the point where I realized He was sovereign worldwide.
Yeah.
Because I felt like He was only sovereign in America. Because, we had small kids at the time, so my vision of moving to especially a third world area, or even, a second world developing area, was there's going to be disease, our kids can get sick and possibly die over there. And so God had to bring me to the point where I said, okay, I trust you. Wherever you lead us, whenever you lead us, I've just got to trust you that you're going to take care of us, especially the children. So,
and we even actually had a relative say, "Are you taking the kids with you?" And we're like, "Of course, yeah, we're taking the kids with us." And one of the conversations we had with Angie's mom and dad, my mom and dad, was, if we really believe what we believe about Jesus Christ, that actually eternity is actually a greater place than what we are in right now. Why do we live like this is the greatest place, but yet eternity is second rate? So why don't we forfeit here some time together for the sake of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and we'll go overseas. But the realization is we have eternity together because we're a family in Christ. And then the realization there is that, hey, you're going to not see the messed up sinner Jeff, here right now maybe, or the kids, but someday in eternity we'll walk together and you'll see the perfected glorified because of Christ's perfect work. And so that was one of those things we wrestled through with family. And it's something you can say, but when you really you're banking on that this is worth doing because what's in the future is actually the greater days are ahead. And that was a tough conversation, but we really wanted to put our trust and belief that was true and is true.
So, what was it like when you first settled in South Asia as a family?
sickness, moved
For Jeff, a lot,
7 times.
Mm-hmm.
More classroom, which was a bit of a shock, So we were just come out of 3 years of seminary and then went right back into a classroom. So,
the language?
Well, language and more strategy coordinator training.
Okay.
But that's where I met Bruce Carlton. So Bruce is now telling firsthand stories from Cambodia and what God was doing there. And then he's also bringing in, Brother Kika's coming in and telling stories of what's happening in our city there, where there's multiplication occurring. And so now it's no longer we're hearing stories, we're actually meeting guys that are having stories. And, whether it's Cambodia or whether it's this brother right there experiencing it just right down the street from us, So it was really just whetted your appetite, but yet also the realization that every 1.5 seconds somebody's going into eternity in this place, never hearing the name of Jesus, was this challenge before you. Because one of the things Bruce had us do was put on our, more or less our mirror in our bathroom, if I'm doing anything else today, how will my people hear the gospel today? And so that sat on the mirror for years and would haunt you when you were making decisions about what you're doing. Because if I'm not training, equipping, gospeling, something about the business, my people are perishing. And, to the point of, there's a bit of a Moses syndrome that you have to have because you love your people, that you want them to hear, and I think that was probably one of the earliest things I remember is just that shift in the midst of sickness and losing 20 pounds and moving, and felt like we'd get to see Jesus someday. And Jesus said, "Well done, my good and faithful servants. What have you done? I've sat on a throne and been sick, and I've moved 7 times, so I'm an expert packer, but that's all I have to bring to you, Jesus." That's sort of what it felt like the first 2 years.
So that was sort of Jeff's world. My world was trying to figure out, how am I going to cook and feed my family in this foreign place,
French fries.
Grocery stores are different. Yeah, our first apartment had been set up for us and with the company. And so we walk into the kitchen and there's just like a set of stove burners, on the counter and a refrigerator. And I had brought some recipes with me, but did not realize how much stuff we fix in the States that requires an oven, of which I did not have. So, and I had inherited a housekeeper who was also a cook who did not speak English and only knew how to fix Indian food, which my kids were not a fan of initially. And so
Babies.
it was very trying to try and communicate, try and figure out a schedule of life, or even a schedule for food, for meals. What is there out there to fix? What are we going to eat? So, yeah, we ate a lot of French fries because you can fry those on a stove. You don't necessarily have to have an oven, but anyway. But I think just being in community, though, with some other expats really helped as far as, okay, what do you guys eat? How do you cook this? And all this kind of stuff. And we did end up buying an oven, a little glorified toaster oven sort of thing. But it's definitely a learning curve. I wasn't ready for the house side of it. I guess I really wasn't prepared for that, because while Jeff was doing all this ministry stuff, I was left with 3 kids, and I didn't know how to feed them or how to take care of them here in this new area. But anyway, you do, you start to talk to people.
Homeschooling at that stage, or were they too young?
They were too young at that point. So, Caleb was like, I had taken him through some kindergarten stuff. So it was, just a little bit, not a major amount.
But just getting out of the house, say, with the 3 kids and finding a place you felt comfortable with just to take them out, that would have been hard, I would imagine.
It was really hard, and especially having 3 little blonde-headed children. Everyone wanted to pinch their cheeks or touch their hair or something, and they were, in culture shock too, so you're trying to protect them, but yet you can't stay inside the whole time because it's not really why you're there.
And Miriam would be up on a little papoose on the back of Angie's back, and she'd be out in the market, the vegetable market, and you're buying stuff. Well, you get back home, and somebody in the vegetable market's handed Miriam a dirty carrot, and she's eaten half of it, and it's covered in dirt and mess, and and she's just happy as can be, and you're going, oh my goodness, what's going to happen, but the kids were actually very resilient in comparison to us when it came to stuff like that, so they didn't know the difference. So riding 5 of us on a motorcycle, they just thought, every kid rides 5 on a motorcycle, and rides in a little backpack up in the back of a motorcycle. That this
in
is
traffic
normal.
Too. This is not out on some country road.
No, this is in a major city, riding a motorcycle with 5 people,
True.
So the kids loved it, thought it was normal.
Yeah. And it was also hard to go from. And in America, we're very individualistic and very, this is our area, this is our house, sort of thing, and our little kingdom, so to speak. And you can come into it if I invite you into it, and all that. But there, your house, we had kids in the apartment complex that would just stop over at all times of day and stay forever. And then you've got this house helper who's there at all hours of the day. And so it was just, it was a lot of culture shock just right there in your face immediately. But you're there because you feel like I've got to be a good witness, but yet I am going insane at the same time. So how do I still be nice and be this, be Jesus to them, but yet say, please get out of my house. I can't handle all this. So there's a lot of growing, and I think just dying to self is just such a constant theme, I think, just all the way through. There's just little things that you just have to let go and die to throughout them.
So what was God doing in you during that, when you look back? What was going on in terms of how he was shaping you?
Well, he was definitely humbling me, because I came over and thought I had all my women's Bible study books, and I was like, hey, I'm going to teach these women the Bible, they're going to go deep and just see all the treasures in it. And I got over here, and it was like, I can't even talk to these people. How am I going to teach them the Bible? And so just having a lot of pride and knowledge of the Bible, but just having to humble myself and learn how to communicate with them, but also learn where they are, because they need milk and not meat, and just and that's why I think teaching the commands is so great, as far as it just gives them enough to obey, and you just build upon that. And just realizing I have so much to learn from them, not only from a ministry standpoint, but even just from a life standpoint, that I'm not the know-it-all American, who knows best for everybody. But so definitely a humbling experience that God's given them knowledge and wisdom that I did not know and still can't fathom, and just adopting a learning attitude through it all.
What was going on for you, Jeff, as you were in these early days?
I think, like Angie, learning a lot from national brothers and sisters. I remember I was hiking up the mountains one day to an area we were going to go share the gospel, and it was a 3 or 4 day walk, and we're sleeping up in a roof of a barn, and I remember waking up and a chicken hit me in the chest, lands on me, and I'm like, what the heck? And I look over, and here's my brother, and he's sitting cross-legged praying, and he'd get up every morning and just spend hours.
He was a national brother.
Yeah, national brother. And he'd spend hours in prayer, and he'd do that every single day. And I can just remember that everywhere I went was just such a norm of, remember being in a training in one area and probably in a room with, 30 other men, and there's another room over there, and it's 4:30 in the morning, and all of a sudden you hear these guys praying and singing, and you're like, man, shut up, it's dark outside, and and you'd lay there for an hour trying to sleep through it, and then you finally get up and try and figure out what the heck are they doing, and so just to learn a lot about their just sort of abiding and their prayer life and their worship, and just that they didn't have a lot, so they just went to Jesus for the needs, and they would pray immediately, and and I think that was a huge thing. And I think one of the real big shifts for me personally was I went through 9 months of strategy coordinator training and really didn't get it, and then my buddy Bruce had met a guy named Chris Stocks, actually from Australia, and he had redesigned his training around adult learning styles. And I'm slow, so I need to. You hit me with adult learning styles, I'm a little more likely to learn because I'm hands-on. So I went back through this very same training, but in about a 2-week period, using adult learning styles. And it's like, and this is probably 2 years later after we've attempted to plant our first church, and we got 3 ladies up in the mountains, and it's a mess. And then we got this other guy who's come to Christ and first believer from his people group, and he's a mess. And so you've tried all this stuff, and now you're hearing the same thing you heard from again, but you're back through the Word of God. And he called it Acts 29, originally Nehemiah, then Acts 29. And it just, that time it clicked in my heart, and being with, and the interesting thing is that time I'm in the room with other men who are multiplying or attempting to multiply, but they're all national brothers, and that really it was just amazing, the power of the Word of God, and I guess that we just spent 2 weeks in the Word of God, looking through the Word, and stuff just came together. In Acts 29, what Bruce taught us really was the beta of what became 4 Fields that Nathan wrote, because a lot of that same stuff is exactly what's there. We got more directive with 4 Fields, and then Jared made it way better than anything I did, but that moment just really was a big shift. And then I think the other thing is Bruce, he would just be big on imitate Jesus. And so I said, okay, brother, can I come with you? I want to go train with you. I want to learn from you. And so me and a guy named Paul Poe just begged him if we could go with him. So he started taking us places, and we were getting to go with some of these other guys who were beginning to see multiplication. And it really wasn't so much the training as it was the evening sitting around with Bruce and one brother, Albert, who actually went to be with the Lord this year, and listening to these guys. And you learned a lot more just sitting around, drinking coffee, eating jam treats, and just from their faith and their experiences. Albert had spent some time in prison for the gospel, so it was just amazing when really Bruce took us 2 by 2 and modeled for us. And it was just a huge breakthrough personally in my heart, because we'd spent all this time failing forward, and then just to really it just resonated in my heart. Plus just to stand on the Word was freeing in a way, because I think it was the other big piece that really happened probably about 2002 for me, was just that release. And I love to read books. I read 6-7 books a week, and I love to read. But the standing on the Word, being consumed by the Word, really sort of came out of that time that Bruce, gave me in just a new way, to literally just say, man, let's attempt to imitate Jesus the best we can. And I know He's the Son of God, and He's unimitatable in many ways, but there's much that I think He desires for us to imitate and obey. And so, it was just an incredible shift in I know my life experience right then, and just put.
How long have you been in country before that?
Probably almost 2 years at that point in time.
Do you think you could have had that same shift at the beginning if you'd hung out with Bruce, or did you need that 2 years of...
I think I needed that 2 years of failing to go up and, walk 10 days up to share the gospel and go up many trips. And, you spend literally a whole year and nobody comes to faith. And then you see one come to faith. And then you see 3 come to faith, and I'm learning to depend on my national brothers like Ramesh and Eidemann. And it just was... I think it just made you. Plus, you had some. Now you've been out in there going, how do you train these illiterates, and how do you help them understand what church is when you're up in this village that's illiterate? They don't have the Bible in their language. They don't have stories in their language. I don't know their language. I know one of the trade languages, and so and I barely even know any of it, at that point in time, So it really, I think it was in the midst of failing forward for those 2 years, just created much more teachableness for myself.
What was the next sort of stage life? What were the what were the lessons? What were the challenges?
I think some of it, there's one side of like taking those trainings and things that Bruce had taught us, like in Nehemiah, obstacles are God's greatest opportunity to work, and how fasting and prayer starts to become a key part of our lives. But I think the other thing was, when the king and queen and the whole royal family were slaughtered, you're going through a civil war, and there's times where you might hear, machine gun fire. You're hearing stories of, the encroachment of, the people coming into the thing near the village or the area you're working at, or even those moments where we had a small bomb go off near the kids, and I don't think they were trying to hurt anybody. They actually yelled, and the guy setting the bomb off yelled at everybody and chased them away, and it was a diversion so they could blow somebody else up. But still, I think those things were at that time. I think the big thing for me was as I was getting to know my national brothers, and I'm traveling 90 to 120 days a year, I'm learning to depend on my brothers. So I'm literally leaving. There's a guy named Abraham, just a dear friend, and we have bags packed with passports in them. That's the way you lived in that time, just so in case you had to go, you could go, and you got emergency routes out and stuff. But learning to trust Abraham with my family, and I got to where that was just an incredible comfort for me. And and I think at the same time, in the midst of that, as you're looking in the Word. And I'm seeing, I remember just one day looking at, we're looking through Paul's journeys, and I'm looking through the epistles, and just seeing how much he used that word encouragement and love, and how much he loves his disciples. And I thought, I don't know that I've ever experienced that in America. And I want to experience that. I want to live that out. I want to feel what that feels like when I'm looking at Paul's life. And I think that was one of those places with a guy like Abraham and other brothers to, you love this brother, and you're literally entrusting your family while you're gone. Now, a lot of times I came back one time that shut the borders down and shut the phones down, shut the airport down, and I'm all in a huff and concerned, and so we come flying back and rushing in the house. All right, baby, we're leaving, get the kids, we're going to Thailand, we're out of here. And because I've been locked out for 3 or 4 days, and she's been in the kettle cooking, and so I come home and I'm all fired up, ready to leave, and she's like, what are you talking about? Can you fix the daggone plumbing? Why don't you get somebody over here to fix the water? We're fine, So here we were outside the country fretting and concerned, and I come home and they don't even know anything's wrong. But, Abraham and, and other expat community, you learn to depend on others in that sense of community. It was an incredible community there of nationals and other brothers that you were, working with. It was it's very different than what I experienced growing up in church.
Yeah. And how about for you, Angie? What was that period like for you?
Well, it's interesting to look back and some of this unrest that we lived through, because I never really had any fear for the kids or me, or Jeff while he was out traveling or whatever. I mean, definitely you prayed for protection, but there was never fear of, we're going to lose our life or we're not going to get out of the country or whatever.
What's God doing in the lives of the kids during this time in overseas? Yeah.
Well, some things you don't realize until you're back in your home country. But through they went to school with many, many different nationalities, and they are just not racist. I mean, they just don't see ethnicity or color or anything, which is great. They just see people as people, and there's no baggage or anything attached to that. I think also they were involved some with us in training, as they got a little bit older or whatever. They could help us in trainings, but also just having a church that met in our home where they could ask questions or they could be involved in picking songs or reading the passage or asking the questions or whatever. They just really grew up just understanding what it meant to be obedient to the Bible. Not just you read the Bible. It's a good book. But it's something to be obeyed. It's something to live by. And I think that they saw that as a huge contrast when we did go back to the States, that the Christian life wasn't as vibrant, I guess, as it was overseas when you're in a community that's just really trying to obey and reach out and multiply. The result of that now is just that, especially the girls want to go back overseas. They've already dedicated their lives to see this, or continue to multiply and stuff. Yeah,
and I think the other thing we saw with the kids was just, it's interesting when you're in a small church that meets in a home and your kids are active, you're taking them out training, or they get to go gospeling when they're free, and or they're seeing it modeled, or they're hearing stories of, we have nationals in the church also. I remember Miriam out one night, and she might have been 8, 7, I don't know. And she's with a young lady who works for us, actually helping with some translation stuff, and then also helps around the house. And so anyhow, Miriam's out there preaching the gospel to her. Now Miriam knows some Nepali. This girl knows no English, or a little bit of English, but Miriam's, going, your God has eyes and he can't see, and has ears and he can't hear, and his hands, he cannot help you. And, so anyhow, they're having this conversation. So it was just so funny because you saw this little prophet in Miriam of going to preach the gospel. And it's just been, you saw it real early on in the church, and you would go and look at it the same way. And then you see Abigail with this sense of, discernment. You see it coming early on, and her ability to discern and just be steady and focused. And and she's funny, we always joke she had a biblical cord hooked to Angie till probably the day she was married. But she was the one who, got out of high school and goes to South Africa, and shy, and and here she is, bold, going out, and doing that. And I remember Caleb had a vision that his generation would be the generation that would finish preaching the gospel to all the nations, and so it's just neat how all that was just bubbled up in their hearts. And and you're hoping that's their legacy, and hoping that's for your children's children and children's children, and and that's your great hope. When you really think about where No Place Left starts in all of our hearts, it really starts with our children, that our children would multiply, not just physically but spiritually through their children, And that's really in your heart of hearts where the whole heart of No Place Left has to begin, is right there. And that's what you desperately seek in No Place Left. And I think that's what becomes the outflow of the ends of the earth of No Place Left.
So what are you most thankful for when you look back at that whole era of life and ministry?
In some ways, thankful for the sufferings and difficulties, because I think they've, they help you take next steps of whatever you're experiencing, whatever you're doing, and gave us more, sense of opportunities to minister. But I think in the midst of that, it's created I have such a high value for relationships now that I don't think I really understood that, early on, just how important, that is. And I think that even just lately, just sort of just keeps bubbling back up is, movements in one sense are all about relationships. It's a network of relationships. It's not a network of methodology. It's a network of one anothering people in the kingdom of Jesus Christ, and that partaking of the word and the giving away of the word and giving away of your life. Early on it may look like there's some methods piece in that, but it's all about relationship. And when you get into the the leadership side of when you're investing in people's lives or other people are investing in you, they're imparting something in you. And so it's interesting, we call it the one anothering hammer. Angie's been teaching this around No Place Left in the U.S., but just I really think the glue, when you think of the 5 levels of leadership, you think about multiplication, you think about churches, planting churches, whatever you want to say, the piece that holds it all together is it's not even really leadership. Leadership's important, but it's the one anothering through leadership, discipling. That love for one another is a demonstration of the gospel of Jesus Christ is true according to Christ, and yet we live in a world that loves to just beat one another up, blogging and saying negative things or whatever. And then, but the reality is, the truth to a world that's dying and headed to hell is our demonstration of love towards one another and towards them is evidence of the gospel. And so I don't think I would have experienced that for not going to Asia, but I also didn't think I would have experienced it experiencing it in my own culture. Has been extremely rewarding, because I know there was just a lot of financial sacrifices over the years to do that in the last 8 years, and a lot of financial difficulties. But the value, of relationships, there's just amazing people in No Place Left and other places, but just incredible experience of godly men and women of God that are attempting to. I think that's the one thing about missionaries, quote unquote, is missionaries often attempt to do something that they're just, in one sense, are an overachiever in the faith realm, because we're not that sharp, and we're and just that sense of, man, God uses you. I use country way of saying, God hits straight licks with crooked sticks. And there's just a value when God honors that heart and that loving one another. So
through this whole thing, though, I have not only taken care of the kids in the home prep, but Jeff has also allowed me to train and to get up into the mountains where our people group was and all that kind of stuff. And he would stay home with the kids, and I would go out for 7, 10, 14 days or whatever. Which was very valuable to me because it helped me to live out the Great Commission, as well. But I would say through this whole thing, whether overseas or even in the States, is, I think, the role of the woman to pray for her husband. Not only protection, but wisdom insight, direction, that we might not be on the forefront of whatever's happening, but we undergird him in what is happening. And I think that is just as valuable a role as the husband or the man may have at the forefront, is if you don't have that backing, it may fall through. So, but just encourage the women that that's probably the mightiest thing that they can do, is to pray for their husband, and especially wisdom, because as attacks have come, and you just, Jeff is frustrated, I'm frustrated, and you just don't know what to do, but just that God would just give him wisdom, because I know I can't talk to these people, or I will sin if I, go out there, but praying that Jeff would just have the wisdom to combat whatever is coming, or to be that peacemaker, or to set someone straight in a loving way, in a biblical way, but just praying that God would use him through that.